Welcome to our new series, Jewish History in the Land of Israel. I am Dr. Robert Wolf, and joining me on this series will be Dr. Sheldon Hirsch, who I co-authored a best-selling book just recently, The Bugs Are Burning. I hope some of you have gotten it and read it. It is a book that describes some of the events during the Holocaust that need to be known and recognized. It's a very, very important book. Again, I hope some of you have gotten it. And as well as Ari Fries, who worked with me on another recent book called The Year 6000, which describes the end of days and what will be happening as we approach that year. We welcome you on our journey through Jewish history from Joshua and his entry into Eretz Yisrael, into the land of Israel, to modern day Israel and the war against Hamas. This war has stimulated a need to look back at our past as well as to our future and effectively deal with the lie that the current Jewish state is simply a European-based colonial effort to make amends for the Holocaust. We'll share with you many little-known historical facts and some well-known facts that may have been forgotten over the years. And most importantly, we will demonstrate our long historical connection to the land of Israel and its critical role in our lives. We will be repeating critical facts throughout this series so that if you wish to write them down and use them, you will be able to have a weekly opportunity to do so. I wish to introduce now Dr. Hirsch to introduce some very important material to begin this show.
Thank you, Rob. Tonight is the start of Hanukkah, the holiday of lights, a most fitting backdrop by which to shed light upon issues that for many remain obscure and in the dark. We will be discussing our long history and how it relates to the war currently raging in the Middle East. This war is unquestionably being waged against the Jewish people as a whole, irrespective of location, irrespective of what we believe, or how we dress. Current events clearly show that this is a war against each and every one of us, the entire Jewish people. A delightful Hanukkah to one and all. October the 7th, 2023, is a day that will live in infamy for Israel and for Jews worldwide. On October the 7th, Hamas butchers entered Israel from the Gaza Strip and immediately set out to torment, torture, and kill as many Jews as possible. More than 1,200 innocents, men, women, children, and even babies were butchered in ways that cannot possibly be imagined. Women were raped, heads decapitated, and babies had their bodies sliced open and discarded much like garbage. This is only a sampling of the acts of savagery perpetrated by Hamas against innocent civilians. What unfolded on October the 7th is in many ways reminiscent of the horrors perpetrated against Jews not only during the Holocaust, but throughout much of our long and troubled history. 80 years have passed since 6 million of our brothers and sisters were exterminated by Hitler. What we must appreciate is that Hamas is Hitler reborn, Let me repeat that again. Hamas is Hitler reborn. Hamas is a reincarnation of the Nazis in particular and European anti-Semitism in general. What we must appreciate is that anti-Semitism has been present since our earliest recorded history. The tragedy of October the 7th is but part of a continuum of hatred that waxes and wanes but never totally disappears. Even when times are good and things look promising, this deeply ingrained hatred is waiting impatiently to surface. One need only open the newspaper, watch television, listen to the radio to see the rise of hatred that permeates this world. And what so few recognize, what so few appreciate, is that if given the chance, Hamas would happily kill every single Jew residing not only in Israel and the Middle East, but every Jew throughout the world. Yes, you and me, our wives, our husbands, our children, our parents, all of us, irrespective of where we happen to be residing at any given time. What has become most distressing is that anti-Semitism is sprouting wildly in every which direction in our own beloved country, the United States of America, the home of the brave and land of the free. Having left their differences aside, both sides of the political spectrum have joined hands in finding common ground in their shared hatred of Jews. Colleges, universities, highly touted academics, and political organizations of all stripes no longer feel restrained, no longer feel the need to remain silent. Whispers of the past have now been replaced by loud rants, and they scream, kill the Jews, destroy racist Israel, from the river to the sea. Yes, the hatred is everywhere. You can't escape it. We must open our eyes to a reality that many of us are unaware of or simply refuse to acknowledge. Anti-Semitism is an incurable disease, an incurable virus that follows us everywhere. Unlike our recent experience with COVID, there is no vaccine that has proven effective to protect us from the virulent virus known to cause anti-Semitism. The ADL, Anti-Defamation League, reported 751 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States in 2013, which then jumped dramatically to 3,697 in 2022, and then catapulted to an additional 400% in the 2 weeks following the October 7th massacre perpetrated by Hamas. It has been said that history can serve as an early warning system. Such a system must never be shut off, and any warning signal must be taken seriously. We must always take heed and react. There have been events in history that stand out by virtue of their sheer enormity. 9/11 was one such event. How can any sensible American who was witness to this event, who saw it unfold on television, who heard the stories related by survivors, witnesses, and first responders, ever forget or ever consider this to be an isolated event, a freak of nature, if you will? What should never be overlooked is that if given the chance, those who planned the 9/11 tragedy would gladly repeat it again, and again. October the 7th is Israel's 9/11. This is a date that will live in infamy, and we must prevent it from slipping into obscurity. October the 7th is a warning that we must never forget. Anti-Semitism and the desire to rid the world of Jews has been an ongoing process from the time Jews first inhabited the area now identified as Israel. Jews were not the undesired outsiders, the strangers who later migrated to the region, as many would argue. Jews were in fact the original, And let me repeat that, the original indigenous people who inhabited the area. Many of these indigenous Jews were attacked at different times in history by either local or foreign powers, resulting in many Jews being expelled, being exiled, or taken prisoner by invading armies and then forced to resettle in a host of other countries. Okay, Ari, why don't you take us on a journey back in time when our people first inhabited the area that is now Israel? A journey that will open our eyes to a reality that so many are entirely unaware of or simply refuse to accept. Ari? Do we have Ari?
While we wait for Ari to phone in, he's a little under the weather this evening, so he is phoning in. While we wait for him, let me follow up on what you just presented, Shelley. Very, very powerful material, and material that is certainly so important at this time in Jewish life. There are so many objective truths that you alluded to in your presentation that are not seen as objective. They're seen as subjective. But there are objective truths that need to be identified as such. And that allows us to understand more clearly why Israel is so important to the Jewish people and has been so important to the Jewish people for so many centuries. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not just something that's occurring since the Holocaust. This is something that has been important to the Jewish people for the moment that Joshua crossed the Jordan River in 1273 BCE. That's a date that you may want to remember. Joshua crossed the Jordan River and entered into Israel in 1273 BCE, which is the 10th of Nisan, 2488. Another date that you may want to hold on to is the date that the Jews were experienced the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, which was 70 CE. That's CE, 70 CE. A little bit later, the Jews experienced the destruction of Jewish life in Israel in 135 CE, which was when Beitar was destroyed by the Roman legions. For much of that 1400 to 1500 period, Jewish life occupied and dominated life in Israel. We had a nation state filled with laws and judges and language that remained constant except for one brief period during the Babylonian exile. But for most of that 14 to 1500 period, that's right, that 1400 to 1500 period, stretching from 1273 BCE, when Joshua entered Israel with the Jewish people, to 70 CE and then 135 CE, when Beitar was finally destroyed and much of Jewish life was undermined. Jews had a state in Israel, and they had a nation in Israel which represented the Jewish people. This is not something that occurred out of the blue. It is something that was part of Jewish life for centuries. And no matter what you hear, no matter what you're told, and no matter what you experience on TV or on the radio or in the newspapers, that is the truth. The truth is that there was 14 to 1500 period span where the Jewish people had a nation in Israel and had a nation of laws and principles that governed their behavior, and were able to pray freely, and were able to relate freely, and were able to socialize freely. and without intimidation, except for the occasional intrusions from foreign powers. But it remained a constant for much of that period again, except for the 70 years of the Babylonian exile, which we will get to. From 1273 BCE, as an example, to the destruction of the first temple, that alone was 850 years. That was 850 years just by itself, from the time Joshua entered Israel to the destruction of the first temple, was 850 years. And Jews lived in Israel freely and openly and had a life which was rich with Jewish belief and Jewish behavior and Jewish laws. And they enjoyed the freedom to be able to do that because they were in the land of Israel, the homeland that they had established and built. That ended in 586. In 586, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Jewish life. And there was a 70-year period where there was much less Jewish life. But what's so interesting is that even during that 70-year period, even though most Jews were exiled into Babylonia, there still were Jews, many Jews actually, thousands. Most historians put it at 50 to 60,000 at least that were still living in Israel in areas, particularly in the Galilee, around Yerushalayim and along the coast. So even in that period, there still were many Jews living in communities in Israel. And then, of course, in 516, the Jews came back into Israel and were allowed to rebuild the temple, and they rebuilt the second temple at that point. Now, these are critical dates, but I do want to emphasize that not everyone agrees with the exact formulation of these dates. There's a lot of disputation about the dates within that 1400 period, but that should not be confusing. The important thing is that it spanned 14 to 1500 years. How it's broken down and exactly how many years each event occurred and how we lived for this period or that period isn't that critical. And we're going to talk about the breakdown of those dates because it is interesting and it is informative. But the fact is that the overall concept that we occupied and lived and had a nation state in Israel for that 1400 to 1500 years is what is critical. As I said before, the destruction of the second temple happened in 70 CE, and ultimately the destruction of Jewish life in Israel occurred with the destruction of Beitar, which was in 135. In that process, almost 2 million Jews were killed by the Romans. But even though the Jews were forced out of Israel, once again, they still loved this land, and many stayed behind. The estimation is that up to 75,000 Jews still remained behind even after the destruction of the second temple and the destruction of Beitar. Just to put it into some context, Muhammad was not born until 571 CE. An important date. Let's repeat that. Muhammad was not born until 571 CE, and the Islamic hordes did not enter Israel until 633 CE. So look at that dating. the Jews had lived in Israel as a nation state for almost 1,500 years, and then another 500 years before Muhammad was even born, and before Islam had an army that sought to invade Israel as well as other areas of the Middle East. So the notion that somehow there was an overlap, that somehow the Islamic world was overlapping with the Jewish world throughout all of this history is just wrong. It's a lie. It's a blatant lie. It is not based in fact. It is not based in truth. It is not based in an honest appraisal of the dates. It was 2,000 years after Joshua crossed over the Jordan, even before the Islamic world was even constructed in the Middle East. Important information that you need to carry with you when you have discussions with other people. So, I don't know if Ari is available now to add some thoughts. I know he has some very important material that he wants to present. I'm hoping that he's able to link up and be able to present. Perhaps producer can let us know if he is available. If not, we will hear more from him next week when hopefully he will be here in person and be able to present. Shelley, any thoughts about what we're presenting at this point?
Well, Bob, I think it's critically important for us to appreciate the fact that we're discussing long-term history. These are not simply isolated events that occur every few centuries or so, but I think if you look back at Jewish history, you're going to see that we've been living in centuries of hatred, starting from way back when Rome first entered the land which is now Israel, even prior to that with Babylonia, etc. And what we have to see, as I mentioned earlier, is that this is in truth a continuum. There may be a quiet day here, a quiet day there, but this incessant hatred is raised nearly every single day throughout the world. It's interesting. Recently, Bret Stephens, who writes in the New York Times, and may I quote a recent piece that he wrote, he stated that, and I quote, "Knowing who our friends aren't isn't pleasant, particularly after so many Jews have sought to be personal friends and political allies to people and movements that, as we grieved, turned their backs on us. But it is also clarifying. More than 3,800 years of Jewish history keeps yielding the same bracing lesson. In the long run, we're alone." Let me repeat that. We're alone. What most Jews must learn from the horrors of October the 7th, we must stop being embarrassed or defensive about Zionism, about our love of Israel, which has proven itself to be one of the world's most successful movements of national liberation. We must call out anti-Zionism for what it actually is. Namely, Hello? Ari?
Yes, hi. Kelly.
Hi. Ari.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. I just got a phone call from the show, so I'm sorry to interrupt.
So fortunately, we have Ari, and I think at this point it would be appropriate to have Ari continue, so that we can add some of Ari's deep insights into this whole issue. Ari, please continue.
All right. Thank you, Shelley, and Dr. Wolf. Thank you for having me on. Freilich and Hanukkah to both of you and to everyone listening.
And to you.
So, thank you. So Shelley, you touched on the Nazis and we talked about, you mentioned lies and propaganda, and there's one particular insidious lie that I wanted to talk about, which is this notion, I don't know if you have heard of this before, that there are Palestinians who claim that they are the original Canaanites. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
So it's actually a brilliant argument if it's true, because it essentially throws back the biblical record back at us. We can say that, yes, Joshua came in and conquered the land, but even if you are indigenous, we're more indigenous because we were there first. And, implicit in that claim is that we really don't have a claim to the land of Israel, and we are just a European colonial empire. And so, just to give two quotes, just to illustrate that I didn't make up this claim. The first is from Muhammad Shahid Alam, who is an economist and academic, a social scientist. He is a professor of economics at Northeastern University in Boston. He's been there since 1988. This is a very educated man, and he had to say the following about Zionists, that they conceived their plan for a colonial settler state in Palestine as they went about executing this plan on the backs of imperialist powers with wars, massacres, and ethnic cleansing, and later, as they have persisted in their plans to dispossess the Palestinians of the last fragments of their rights and legacy, whose Canaanite roots were more ancient than Isaiah, Ezekiel, David, and Moses. And then even more explicit is Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader, who when he was visiting a refugee camp, a Palestinian refugee camp, said the following. He said, quote, "This land is for its people, its residents, and the Canaanites who were here 5,000 years ago. We are the Canaanites." So, first my question for him would really be, so why are you the Palestinian Authority? Why not just be called the Canaanite Authority? Or why the PLO? Why not the CLO? But, all joking aside, that's quite a claim. So let's delve into that. So what does science have to say? So interestingly enough, there was a study done on ancient Canaanite DNA back in 2020, not too long ago, at Tel Aviv University. And it analyzed Canaanite DNA and concluded that most of today's Jewish and Arabic-speaking populations share a strong genetic link to the ancient Canaanites. So they're giving you a half-truth, but they can't make that claim exclusively, because we too can make a claim that we have a tie to the ancient Canaanites who lived in that land. And Professor David Reich from Harvard, who's a geneticist and expert in the study of ancient DNA, he said, quote, "This study suggests there is a deep genetic connection of many Jewish groups today across the diaspora and many Arab groups to this part of the world thousands of years ago." So essentially we have a study that says that we have modern day groups in Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan, that all of these people, not just the Palestinians, but everybody, shares a large part of their ancestry, and in some cases more than half, with the Canaanites. So from a scientific perspective, yes.
Unfortunately, we have to run. Your presentation is right on target, as was yours, Shelley, and we look forward to systematically going through all the lies.
You are listening to
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.